Welcome to the Budgets, Risk Management, and Contracts discussion for hemp production in the state of Kentucky. I'm Tyler Mark, Associate Professor, Production Economics, University of Kentucky. Looking back over the span from 2014 to 2018, what you can see is the rapid expansion of hemp acreages within the U.S. One thing that you'll also notice in this graph is that there are a lot of different individuals or different groups reporting hemp acreages. So as you can see in the light blue bars, these are acres reported by states. The darker, slightly grayish bars are reported by FSA, and the darker blue bars are reported by Vote Hemp. As you can tell, there's no consistency or very little consistency among these. So that's one thing to keep in mind as you see different reports put out on hemp acreages going forward. Hopefully in 2020 and 2020 and beyond, we'll be able to get these acreages lined out as everybody starts reporting to FSA on an annual basis according to the interim final rule, and we'll have a more consistent acreage count of hemp acres produced in the U.S. The gray bar you can also see is the greenhouse square footage reported in the U.S. The majority of that is going to be for transplant and clonal production, but there is some full-scale production taking place in greenhouses as well. But you can see that it's had significant growth over the last several years as well. This is just an animation of 2015 to 2019 on how hemp acreages have kind of spread across the country, and this is utilizing the FSA data set. So as you saw in the previous slide, we know that the data set isn't complete, but it gives us a picture of how things are spreading across the country on a county by county basis. And as we get more and more data into the FSA system, then we'll be able to complete this map and have a better picture of where the spots, where hemp production is actually taking place across the country and the level with which it's taking place. If we break this down and look just at Kentucky hemp acres, what you're going to see is that license numbers have skyrocketed from 2014 to 2019. However, the one thing that you should really note in this is just because they talk about licensed acres does not mean those are actually acres planted. For example, in Kentucky for 2019, we had over 60,000 acres licensed, or right at 60,000 acres licensed. However, we only planted about 22 to 25,000 of those, and we only harvested 22 to 24,000 of those acres. So what really hits the market is what's harvested, not what's licensed. So just keep those in mind, that's something that's a little different compared to a lot of other crops, in that you have a licensed number of acres and then you have a planted and harvested. Planted and harvested would be similar to other crops, but the licensed is a new piece specifically for hemp. One other thing that I would say, and this is a study that was done by the National Natural Products Association back last fall, in the fall of 2019. The results were released on October 17th, and it talked about how consumers didn't really understand how products were sampled or controlled, or regulations provided around specifically CBD. So it talks about new poll shows CBD usage drop sharply when consumers learn FDA has no safety standards for this. So this is one of the concerns within the sector, is that we need some real clarification on what the rules are and what the standards are. There are a number of groups going after this or looking at this, trying to determine the right way to do this, but this is something that is a potentially holding the industry back from moving forward. So let's go on and get into some of the markets and the actual budget pieces for hemp production for 2020. The first thing I like to do is I like to remind people that economics are important. When I first got into this crop in 2014, the comments were that this crop is the next, it's a silver bullet, it's the crop to solve all problems. Well, it does have a lot of potential, but it's not a silver bullet. It's just another tool in the tool belt, so to speak, for producers to use incorporate into their rotations and figure out how to maximize its impact on the bottom line as you put that into your crop mix and your crop plan. One thing that I can say is we went from 2014 to 2019, and you saw that in the earlier graphs, is a significant shift out in supply. So we've had a huge shift out in supply. We've had a couple of things on the demand side. One is that regulation on safety standards. Another one potentially may be we can't put this in animal foods and certain foods wide ranging throughout our supply or our food chain. So demand is kind of holding steady. Maybe it's increasing, but probably not as drastically and as much and as rapidly as supply. But supply has increased substantially, causing that to shift out and putting downward pressure on prices. And this is kind of the look I get when I tell people that prices for this product or prices for this crop, especially at the farm gate, have been going down rapidly as a function of the increase in supply we've seen over the last couple of years. Specifically, we can look at the downward pressure on prices. So in 2019, when I put my budgets together in March and April, we were looking at that somewhere between almost $4 and $5 per point or per percent CBD. Now, when I put these 2020 budgets together, I'm thinking down there closer to $1, maybe $1.50, and less than $1. So a lot of our producers, I'm telling them to be able to plan and plan for having less than $1 per point being the price for their CBD hemp. So that's something really to think about. So we've had basically an 82% decrease in price since that July timeframe of 2019. So it's been a rapid decrease in price. So one is oversupply. Two, potentially has to do with processing capacity availability. So a lot of processors are funded via venture capital. That venture capital flowed in to the industry, but it also flowed out very quickly as well. So they were kind of left hung in the middle without the capital to expand out that processing. So they forfeited contracts or didn't fulfill contracts and have caused a lot of bad publicity within the industry, not necessarily as prices have come down. So let's take a look specifically at grain and fiber. I will say that they kind of have a lot of woes right now. These are two areas. Hemp grain has long been produced in Canada, and Canada has had significant acres of hemp production over the past 30 years, especially for grain. Fiber production, you see a lot of fiber production coming out of Southeast Asia and countries in that area of the world. These are two that when we first started the hemp program in 2014, especially in the state of Kentucky, were thought that we're really going to take off. And if you look at the budgets and stuff, the budgets for this, and you can access my full budgets on the University of Kentucky Industrial Hemp webpage, and I'll have a link to that at the end of this presentation. But you can access my full Excel budgets there and change them to your own scenario. But I've only got a small snapshot of key components here. But what you can see is that we're somewhere in that 1,200 pounds of grain per acre at 70 cents. So it gives you a revenue of $840 an acre. We're estimating total variable cost to be $343, returns above variable cost to be $495, and returns above all fixed cost per acre of $225. So that sounds pretty good right now. One thing I would caution people on to think about with this is that there are no chemicals, no herbicides, no insecticides, pesticides that can be used in this crop currently. So weed pressure can be a problem. There's also repair and maintenance increases. So if you see the combine here, that would be how you would harvest that grain. Hemp was used for a reason. It's very strong and can cause a lot of repair and maintenance issues within your combine if you're not careful. And then that 70 cents um, is representative prices that we're seeing in that space. However, trying to store hemp grain, harvest it correctly, get it cleaned, and get it dried can be a problem. So you can end up with mold and other material in it, so you can get some significant discounts. So that is something to think about: is how are you going to store this product efficiently within your operation? Do you have a separate bin? It's probably also going to require some extra maintenance in terms of storage, because it's going to have to be moved. It's a food crop. It'll pick up moisture fairly quickly, especially in Kentucky with our humid weather during the summer. So definitely something to think about. Hemp fiber, we're looking at about 10,000 pounds an acre, or 5 ton, at about 7 cents per pound. So it gives you a $700 revenue. Returns and total variable cost of $445, return over variable cost of $254, and a negative $18 after all fixed costs are paid for. So some things to keep in mind here. Seed costs in this space right now are still fairly high. We're using a higher number of seeds per acre than you do in the grain side of things. That's one area. Another area is we still need to get the yields up. However, keep in mind that for the grain and for the fiber, these two areas aren't growing nearly as fast as the essential oil or CBD side of things we're going to talk about here in a second. So not much emphasis has been placed on this, and it's going to take some time for the genetics and breeding programs across the U.S. to catch up to get us to a point where the fiber industry really becomes viable. For the state of Kentucky, I'm really excited about the fiber industry. I think it has a lot of potential. However, I think one of the key things that we need to do, especially with the fiber industry, is turn the equation around. So it has been, to some degree, not always, that we've just produced or thought about producing hemp fiber without keeping in mind what the end use for that fiber is going to be. I think we need to start at what the end use for that fiber is going to be and work backwards to get the right genetics and the right breeding programs in place to get those genetics to produce the type of fiber that we need to go for the end use. So that's just going to take some time. Keep in mind, this crop hasn't been produced in the U.S. for decades. So once our breeding programs catch up, I think we'll see that these two markets begin to develop. The one that everybody likes to talk about is CBD production, and I would probably more broadly classify this as essential oil production. We're only going to talk about CBD here, but you could also look at budgets for CBG, CBA, all the other cannabinoids that exist within this crop. So let's take a look at this budget. And what we have here is two models. So we got the tobacco model, or you could think about that as a bare ground model. And then we have a plasticulture model. You can think about that as like producing tomatoes. You're up on plastic, you're up on rows. So what I've done here is I've got a 6% CBD is my estimate. Now, some of you are going to argue with me and tell me that this is low, and I agree that I'm being very conservative on the 6%. I tend to operate off a 25-to-1 ratio, so this is actually a little lower than that. So a 25-1 ratio would give me at 0.3% THC, about 7.5% CBD. So 7.5% CBD is kind of the upper end of that. So you could think about adjusting this up. It's going to make your numbers look a little bit better. So that's one area that you could think about. Price per percent CBD, I have in here at 150. This is probably a little high. So I'm hoping that as processing catches up with some of the production from 2019, that we're going to see prices come back a little bit. We're going to get some regulation and some standards in from FDA and some safety standards in place. So maybe that pushes up on demand a little bit. So maybe we get a little upward movement in price going forward. So that's two things you can think about. You can think about turning the CBD percentage up, maybe dialing price back a little bit. We'll look at some sensitivity here in a second on this. In the tobacco or bare ground model, I'm thinking about 3,000 plants an acre. In the plasticulture model, I'm thinking about 1,500 plants an acre. The next line is dry floral material per plant. For bare ground, I have it at 0.8. For plasticulture, I have it at 1. Some new research that's coming out says that could be, there's probably really no difference between the two. So you could even both of those out to 1 and 1. And I'm even seeing some production that's somewhere between 1 and 1.5 pounds per acre or per plant. So there's a lot of movement in that place in there that you could do that with. Harvest index, this is purely just we're saying that 95% of what we harvested will actually is actually captured. So you're going to have some losses during the harvest process that you lose 5% of that either 0.8 or 1 pound dry floral material per plant. So then we're going to get a total marketable. We're going to get a total revenue of $19,000 and $12,000. Total variable cost per acre. You can still see that these are really significant. The bulk of this is wrapped up in plant cost. Right now I have these built in at $4 a plant. Some of you are probably purchasing plants at more like $2 to $2.25, $2.50, and maybe even growing them cheaper than that. So this cost here can come down significantly as those plant costs come down. So that's the biggest area where costs rack up. So it gives us $362 above total specified fixed cost, or total specified fixed cost, or $367. $371 for the plasticulture, so plasticulture is a little more expensive. Then you get returns above variable cost of somewhere between $1,600 and $2,000. This is very representative of what I would think in a lot of tobacco type systems. From the beginning, I've kind of expected this crop to commoditize and come down to something comparable to what tobacco was in terms of returns. So let's look at some basic sensitivity. So basically what you have here is across the top you have CBD percentage, and across the and down the y-axis you have dollars per point. So $1 a point, $2 a point, that's per percent CBD. So you can tell as you go down or go up in dollars per point, your revenue jumps up quite a bit. And then this is percent CBD from dry floral material. So we're in that 6%, $1.50. So my number's coming in somewhere in here. But if you get up there next to that that 25 to 1 ratio of 7.5, and you're in that 150, so now you're looking at somewhere in this space here. So and then if you have some of those varieties that do happen to get up in that 8 or 9%, you look even better. So this just kind of gives you an idea of the sensitivity to this. Now what I can say is if you get prices dropping much below that 150 without increases in CBD percentage or pounds per plant, this can go negative pretty quickly. Plasticulture, a lot of the same story. If you get up here in this 7.5%, it looks better, especially if you get on up here closer to $2 a pound. So this just kind of gives you an idea of what the sensitivity is. And if you look at our tables, we have a lot more sensitivity tables in our actual budgets. So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at that in those budgets that we haven't brought into this PowerPoint. So feel free to go take a look at those. So let's talk now a little bit about some of the risk in the industry. So the first thing I'm going to bring up is conventional versus feminized versus clones, the cost of production, or especially the cost of inputs, and maybe some input availability for 2020. So 2019, we had 34 states or so that had production. In 2020, we're going to have 48 states that had the ability to produce, 48 plus states. We still have a couple more that are working on legislation. So that's going to put increased pressure on The seed availability, clone availability for 2020. So if you look in the blue boxes on the right hand side, and this is a graphic out of Hemp Benchmarks publication. So they're one of the services that does some reporting on pricing. The other service that does that is Pan-X Exchange, and Pan-X Exchange are the prices that I used earlier in the presentation on price of biomass and how rapidly it had dropped. But if you look in the blue boxes here, what you're going to see is CBD clones. The prices for CBD clones are still ranging somewhere between that $175 and $450 per plant. The industrial seeds, not too expensive. That would be for your fiber and grain side of things. But then when you get down to the feminized seed, on a per seed basis, we're still in that 25 to 125 per seed. So, and keep in mind, genetics are extremely important in this. They dictate a lot of what the percent CBD will be. So that's on the CBD side of things. I did also include their new report comes out with CBG seeds and CBD clones, CBG clones. They're significantly more expensive. So that is something that you can think about within your model if you're gonna go after CBG versus CBD. So, but keep in mind what that cost of production is going to look like. We have not developed new budgets for those. Hopefully, we'll get started on those very soon. Labeled chemicals. I've already mentioned that's one problem and a risk within the industry. So you're going to have lots of either mechanical weeding or potentially hand weeding of this crop. It's also in terms of disease, and funguses and molds, insect pressure. There's a couple other videos in this series that we're going to talk about access to those types of chemicals and what are some of the big diseases and big pests that impact this crop. So be on the lookout for those as well. This is another area of research that we're really trying to move into, and that's on the drying methods. There are lots of different drying methods. There are almost these machines that look like big pizza ovens that conveyor it in, and it works its way back and forth through here to dry this out. These are the tobacco barns that you would see in the flue-cured Carolinas area that have been moved into Kentucky, and we're drying some hemp in those. These are our traditional tobacco barns. This would be like a hops dryer. This would be a peanut wagon that you can use forced air into and dry the crop. There's also cyclone dryers. But there are lots of options out there, and right now we really don't have any idea what the best management practice is in terms of what should we use to dry our crop. There's also a freeze drying method as well. But we're in the process at the University of Kentucky of examining which of these drying methods works better in terms of preservation of CBD content, CBD integrity, and do they impact the cannabinoid profiles of this crop. So more to come on that. Access to credit and crop insurance. This is an area, especially access to credit, that is getting a little bit better. I will say I don't find too many lenders that are willing to lend money on the crop itself, simply because of the volatility, the infancy of the industry, and we don't really have any market transparency yet. So it's not like a lot of other crops where you can go out and see a futures contract or a futures market and have that price discovery component. So we're a long way away from that. And lenders read the press too, and they see what's going on in the industry, and they hear things about that. So that's been a struggle. This, I think, will work its way out. It's just going to take a lot of time. Setting up bank accounts really hasn't been a big issue as of lately. That was an issue early on. It seems to be getting a lot better. Operating loans can be a bit problematic. One thing I would say is that's kind of a concern to me is that producers who go out and have an operating loan for a traditional crop, corn, beans, wheat, tobacco, they use that operating line of credit then to produce hemp. If their hemp crop then goes under, they have nothing to help pay that operating line of credit back. So that's a kind of a mismatch of what the funds were loaned for versus what they were actually used for. So there's some problematic pieces there. There are some other risk management tools starting to come in. There's private crop insurance. There's the non-insured crop insurance assistance program, or NAP, whole farm revenue policy, actual production history pilot program that was launched in 2020 for certain states, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Then there's also supposed to be a nursery value select pilot program coming in 2021. Farm programs, I think we're probably still a ways away from having any of our traditional farm programs for this crop. Futures market, we're a long way away from having the volume needed to be able to make this operate. Security, this is one that had been a problem. It's kind of easing up a little bit, but early on, back in 16, 17, 18, some in 19, the value of this crop basically necessitated the need to have some sort of security on hand to think about making sure the crop and material did not get stolen or disappear anywhere. So that is slowly becoming not as big of an issue. So let's talk about that actual production history crop insurance. So it's 21 states, and it's not all counties in those 21 states. And I've got a map here in a second so that you can actually see the counties. But it is for these 21 counties, and it's for grain, fiber, and floral, or flour. Couple things that go along with it. You have to be compliant with applicable state, tribal, and federal regulations. At least 1 year history of producing hemp crop. You have to have a contract for the sale of the insured hemp. This could have been a sticking point, or maybe a sticking point for crop insurance adoption this year, because I haven't seen a whole lot of contracts out for producers to be able to get a contract with. So I'm not sure yet how many contracts were actually written for hemp. And I'm guessing a big chunk of it was, one, they didn't have any production history, and two, they didn't have a contract. They have to be licensed, won't cover hemp exceeding the federal acceptable guidelines of 0.3% THC, and there's no replant available. So there's a lot more information on this on RMA's website, and if you'll go there and look at that, you can find a lot more detailed information. And if you are going to consider crop insurance in the future for hemp, I would say get with your crop insurance specialist and talk with them through the different avenues. So these are all the counties in blue that have hemp crop insurance available to them. So as you can see, even with Kentucky, we have a chunk of the state that doesn't have any crop insurance. There's a chunk here in Alabama. So as you can see, there are places that don't have access to this, even within those 21 states. Specifically for the state of Kentucky, here's the map for the state of Kentucky, and you can see that a couple counties in northern Kentucky and a number of counties over here in eastern and southeastern Kentucky do not have access to this pilot program. That's purely because there was not enough information in those counties, or enough production in those counties, and information collected to put together any type of premium schedule for those counties. So as we get more and more production, I think some of these will fill in. Just to kind of give you an idea of what all is covered, You can do CBD, transplant, or direct seeded. You can do floral or whole plant, so you're going to harvest just the floral material, you're going to harvest the whole plant, and you can do that under an irrigated or a non-irrigated system. You can also do it for certified organic or organic transitional for both as well. You can do the same options for fiber and grain. So like I said, get with your crop insurance specialist to determine what's the right route or avenue for you. In terms of coverage levels, coverage levels goes from 50 to 75. You can see the premium subsidy level and your share of the premium that you have to cover. And those are some of the key points on the crop. The next area is legal and labor. So transportation, banking, banking we've already touched on. Transportation, please make sure that you have all your documentation with you as you transport this material. Access to labor is going to continue to be a problem, especially in certain states. In Kentucky, we've had a history of having tobacco labor in place. That transitions over pretty easily into hemp harvesting, planting, and well as if you need it for weed management. So that's not a problem here in the state of Kentucky. However, some states that don't have tobacco production, vegetable production, could have a pretty steep learning curve to get into the labor side of the market. Standards for final products and testing of THC, I think that's still an issue that needs to be gotten over. FDA, I've already got those out. State plans, you can see where your state's at and what your specifically your state plan is. State fee schedules, I will say that those vary drastically from one state to the next and can create some competitive advantages for some states versus at other states. So definitely something to look at and understand where you're at. Lawsuits, these are going to continue to be a thing within this industry as we get as it continues to grow and mature. We've got a long way to go. We've got the seed side of things to get correct, to get certified seed, and make sure that our seed quality is good. We've got contract issues, so that's going to continue to be a growing pain for this industry. International markets, as the international market continues to see opportunities, they are going to continue to see how they can move into this market in the U.S. if there's profit potential. Just to kind of give you an idea of where raw hemp comes from, you can kind of see that the majority of our raw hemp in 2019 came out of Europe, some out of China, a little bit out of Canada, and a few others. So, and you can see it's been kind of a moving target. We peaked out back in 1999, then we moved down significantly to a low somewhere in 2011, and then it gradually went back up through 2017, then fell off, and then 18 and 19 have been back up again. So there is some importing of raw hemp that is taking place. Contracts and storage. These are probably two of the most important pieces and oftentimes overlooked. So from the contract standpoint, you really need to know what the terms of that contract is. And I can say that as I've seen multiple contracts from multiple companies, the terms of those contracts can vary widely, but you need to understand what the ins and outs of that contract are and what your protections are as a producer and what the protections are for the processor side of things. We have a extension publication we're in the process of trying to get out at the University of Kentucky that'll help provide some more guidance on that. We've been working with a lawyer on that project to help us get some concrete thoughts in that. What are the payment terms? So think about the payment terms in terms of how you're going to finance this business. Do you get paid up front some? Do you get paid during different stages of production? Do you only get paid at the end when you deliver it? Or is that an initial payment when you deliver and then there's another payment 60, 90, 180 days out. How does that work in terms of your finances? Can you finance that and make that work in your cash flow? This can really dictate your ability to grow this crop. Make sure to involve a lawyer, understand what's going on, and some of the research that I've seen shows that there's a lot of speculation going on. So people growing without any type of contract. There was a piece come out that talked about 60% of the production in 2019 was grown without a contract. So think about that and how that might impact your business. Storage. Think about how you're going to store this product potentially 6 to 12 months. So on the grain side of things, how are you going to store this product? How are you going to move it and rotate it through bins? How are you going to keep air on it? Like I said, it's going to require some more management than what you tend to think about. On the fiber side of things, you may have to have this undercover. Do you have access to get this undercover and out of the weather? Are you going to put it on the ground and cover it with some sort of tarp or plastic covering? So how's that going to work? How are you going to maintain the quality of these products? And then if you have floral material, how are you going to store that? Are you going to store that in super sacks? Is it going to stay hanging in the barn? Are those super sacks going to be in a controlled, climate controlled environment? Or are you going to take that and toll process it so that all you're left with is storing the crude after it's been toll processed? So there are lots of different storage components there that you need to think through, and how you're going to do that and maintain the value and integrity of the product potentially 6 to 12 months down the road. So definitely something to think about. So some contract considerations. Make sure to know your state laws, regulations when it comes to agricultural production contracts. What happens if pre-harvest THC is tests above allowable amounts? Who's responsible for that? Is that all the farmer's fault? Does the processor share in some of those costs? How does the destruction of that crop take place? What happens if post-harvest THC is above an allowable amount? When CBD or essential oil tests, when are those taking place? Are you getting paid on the test when that product before it goes into the processing system or the extraction system, or you get paid after it comes out of the extraction system? So these are all important things to think about. Who's providing the plant material or genetics? Depending upon who provides these is if it's farmer owned or if it's processor or company owned, could also dictate who has to go get the crop insurance for this product. So make sure and work through that. Who's responsible for all these testing costs? So a lot of these varieties and genetics cultivars are coming from the marijuana production. So they have really high potential CBD, but with high potential CBD probably is above or out of spec or above standards for THC. So you're going to have a lot of testing costs involved in starting to test that material early so that you don't go over that THC level. So who's paying for those tests? You can also have heavy metals tests, residues tests. So who's paying for all that? So going forward in 2020, producers, how many acres can you effectively manage? As I go across the country, I hear people talking about they're putting in 100, 1,000 acres. This crop has a pretty steep learning curve. How many of these acres can you actually effectively manage, and do you have the labor force to manage? Do you have access to the market I'm producing for? So do you actually have a processor lined up? Does that processor actually have access into the market or a retail brand that they're using, or are they just processing it for somebody else? How much do I have to invest? I would tell producers, don't spend any more money on this crop than you're willing to lose. Okay, how are you going to finance this? Is this all self-financed? Is there money coming from somewhere else? Are you able to get a bank loan? How are you financing? Do you have a contract? Do you understand the contract? Do your homework with the company you're contracting with. Understand where their money's coming from. Understand how their business plan is set up and what they're doing. Look at ways to mitigate that risk. Is that a contract that gives me a portion of that money up front? Is that crop insurance? Is that whatever else you could come up with to help mitigate the risk? What is your plan B? So you have that contract in place, you tried to mitigate that risk. However, that company went bankrupt. What is your plan B? How are you going to get rid of that crop and how are you going to get out? What happens if the crop has to be destroyed? Can you afford to do that? Processors, much in the same vein. How much can I effectively process? I know I've spoken with processors and they've given me processing numbers and then tell me how many acres they have, and it's like it's going to take them multiple years to process the crop that they have contracted. So how is that going to work? Do you have the market, and how big is it? Do you understand the market? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Who has the liability? Well, my contract and terms attract. Will the contract and terms attract the number of acres that I need? What's my plan B if venture capital pulls out? Do I have access to capital? How long can I store? Understanding the rules and regs and financing that operation. So for my crystal ball, and this should be 48 plus states looking to get into this. So we're going to have more pressure on the system, and I think more downward pressure on prices potentially, unless we get a few other things to play out in the industry as in terms of new regulations. I think there's going to continue to be a machine that hypes this crop. I'm not saying that there are not opportunities, and yes, there are opportunities, but make sure that you do your homework. We still see a lot of producers with little or no ag background, which is an amazing and exciting opportunity for the ag industry to get involved and work with those producers. And they bring a lot of energy and new thoughts, but they have different norms as well. So that's created a unique situation, but it has been a lot of fun to work with those that have little or no ag background in the way that they think about this. International markets are going to continue to be out there. Concentration, we're going to see concentration within this industry as we do with almost all ag industries. Contracts are going to continue to play a role. Crop insurance, we're going to get more and more clarification on that. We're still going to have probably some oversupply issues. Financing is going to be a problem. Pricing, probably talked about that. It's probably could have some downward pressure on it unless we get a few other things that fall in place for the industry. There's lots of references out there. We've actually published a couple of new pieces in 2020, updating some of the work we did in 2019. We've also got our 2020 budgets out that you can get to, but these are a lot of the key pieces. Another one that I would point out is the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, which is a pretty comprehensive website in terms of hemp information. As always, feel free to reach out to myself, Tyler Mark, or Jonathan Shepard, or Will Snell with any questions about hemp. This is kind of the hemp team on the economic side at the University of Kentucky. So once again, thank you for your time. My name is Tyler Mark, and feel free to reach out to us with any hemp questions we can help with. Thank you.